set of information. So I want you to grab at the table the pack that Colette brought around to you. I have some extras if you need some more at your table. Yours aren't blue, they're gray, but they look a little bit different than Stacy's. The reason why I want to talk to you about this is because you are the front line when it comes to parent questions regarding Terra Nova tests and skills and how do I read this and what does this mean. So this is a kid version that would go home to parents, to families. And even grade levels, for the most part, take only this portion of the test. So there would just be the one piece. At 5th grade, 7th grade, and 10th grade, that's the one anomaly there, they actually have two pieces of paper. So you'll see a 5.7 and a 5.7. That's because at those grade levels, they take that additional test called the InView. Maybe some of you remember that when you gave Terra Novas. The InView test, which is this piece of paper right here, has the bars, basically just bars across at the top. This is in essence sort of a mock IQ of sorts, not literally. The score that it spits out is called a CSI, which is their ability to learn, their ability to understand information. So if you find that piece of paper that looks like this, has a 5.7 on the side, bars across. I have more if you want extra copies at your table. Sequences, analogies, planative reasoning, verbal reasoning, both words and context, those are the areas of the test. The SS, the NPA, the NPG columns, that's a lot of statistical mumbo jumbo, to be quite honest. That's not something that you're going to want to explain to parents that are looking at this. Parents want to know, how is my kid doing? So on this form, which is an InView, it specifically says National Percentile Scale. The way you read that is by understanding that my child did better than this percent of students. So the very first one is sequences. That national percentile grade is a 45. You can see that bar goes basically to a 45. You read that by saying they did better than 45% of students at the same grade level that also took this test. So you don't necessarily, as a parent, this is something that they don't understand when they see a 45. Oh my gosh, my kid got a 45. They're going to fail and never pass high school. It's not that number. Truthfully, if your kid is a middle-of-the-road kid, they're going to be right smack dab in the middle of that bar for the most part. All of your kids are going to fluctuate one way or the other depending on their subject area. But national percentile score, you read it by saying you scored better than 62% of the other kids the same grade that took that test. Correct, just like growth charts. Exactly. Questions about that bar graph? We're okay there? This test is that test that has a series of pictures and they rotate just slightly and then they say which one comes next. Analogy words, or the analogy shapes, even this one is to this as this is to blank. So it's not information, it's not do you know math, science, reading, history, it's can you process, yeah, can you process information? Can you take apart data and learn from it? So truly, what it does is spits out that CSI score, which is right here. You can see a CSI. This person has a CSI of a 108. And they give a range, saying if you were to take this test on a different day, we would expect still this student to score somewhere between a 104 and a 111 based on how they scored. Okay. Our entrance exam for students when they're coming in, they take this same InView. We're looking for 100, ideally, in terms of are you going to make it here without any additional academic support whatsoever. On a high end, we're looking at the highest, maybe like a 120, 130, somewhere in there. in terms of academic performance for a student. Again, just do they have the understanding, the grounding to learn? That may or may not be representative of what that kid's doing in your classroom. This is a really great number to address a student who is doing poorly in your class, and you go back to this and say, you can do so much better. You should be doing so much better. This is not an ability to learn problem. You're just not applying yourself. And that is that root number that helps you in that conversation, is that CSI. 5, 7, and 10. Well, 3. Third grade does also. So third grade, fifth grade, and seventh grade. And then at the high school level, we do it in 10th. Yep.
Who's administering it?
That's faculty and staff in the spring.
Okay, so
Yep.
everyone stops or
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we shut down school for 2 mornings and take those tests. But for new students coming in, just something to know, there is an InView on file for all of our new students coming in because that is part of their placement exam. So that would be an interesting piece of information too if you need to drill back in, dig that out about why is this kid not doing well in my class. That gives you just another vision of them. Now, I am the first to say to every parent that I meet with that this test is only as good as that kid was on April 14th in the spring. You know, whatever happened the night before, if their girlfriend broke up with them, if they forgot to eat breakfast, if the kid sitting next to him was tapping his pencil the whole time, all of those affect this score. So it is a snapshot glance of their ability, okay? So that is InView. The other piece of paper that has a 5.7 also goes with that same grade level, but it is an exact match of the other piece of paper that you have at 6th grade. So if you're a 5th grade parent, a 10th grade parent, they have these 2 pieces of paper because they have that 1 extra. But now at this point, for purpose of conversation, either grab the 6th grade or the 5.7 that looks like this. They're exactly the same. So take one of these, and I'm going to talk through how to read this information. Okay, everybody got one? Yep. You hit your limit. Yeah, I mean, it's in their student file. So yes, we also can drill into it digitally online as well. You know, just to get that information about the students. But as a department in science, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, just in terms of making that decision and that rule. As a department, this is something that you want to take a close look at. Math at that 5th grade to 6th grade break has a hard and fast rule that if their CSI is not at a certain level, I can't even remember what it is off the top of my head, 120, then the student is not eligible to jump to the next higher level math class. They have to take traditional math. So as a department, that might be some data that you want. You want to know on average what's our kid's CSI score so we can just set a blanket. That helps remove the subjectivity out of that decision of can you have it or can you go to the honors class or not go to the honors class. You either did or you didn't. That's also an important motivational piece on the student end in April when they're sitting down to take that test to care a little bit more. Because that CSI score then determines their course. Right. That's a little different for that one. But something to think about. Okay, so this score. These are objectives that have been detailed out and listed for different grade levels. So different grade levels score different objectives, but Terra Nova tries to give you specific data and information about how your students are doing. So I happen to be looking at the 5.7, the 5th grade one. I don't know how much difference there is between 5th and 6th grade. Math certainly has quite a bit of variance. We're done with this one. That's that InView. Yep. So those list items, those bullet points here, are slightly different based on the grade level. But what it does is it measures how the student handles that topic, that piece of information. The student score is the dot, the circle. And you can see down in the far right corner, if it is an open circle, so it's empty, that is considered low mastery. A half filled in circle would be moderate mastery. A completely filled in circle, high mastery. That bar, that tiny little line that goes through the dot, that's considered their range of performance. Again, if we were to give this test on a different day, we would expect this same student still to fall somewhere between this number and this number. The bar graph, the gray bar, is where Terra Nova expects your kids to fall. Expects your students to fall somewhere in that gray bar. That would be considered the mastery, moderate mastery range. Some are higher, some are lower. So Cammie's looking at the 6.7 grade level, and she's looking specifically at problem solving and reasoning under math. This kid has a moderate mastery bubble, but you can see the range of understanding is far off on the right. That's because at that 6th grade level, that's an introductory skill. So they're not necessarily expected to have mastered that idea yet, but on the big spectrum of what does this kid understand and not, they fall here, which in perspective seems low because it's below that mastery range, but they were not expected at 6th grade to have mastered that idea. They should be moving towards that. Makes sense? Oh, you're good. You're good. Makes sense? I'm trying to give you all this information to arm you to be able to talk through a page like this with mom and dad. Okay? The student score, like I said, is that dot. That student score is also represented in the first column, is the number. So on the very first one here, student scored an 85, the dot's at an 85. The national OPI, or the national score in this objective, would be a 65. So the difference between the national score and this student score is a 20-point difference. Just, again, different ways to interpret the same exact data. Okay? On the back side. You'll see the bar graph, the labels of the graph moving from the left to the right. There's an anticipated national percentile, which means based on their scores in the past, or based on Terra Nova test results in general, we would expect this student to score here. Based on how they did on this test, based on how they did on the InView, Terra Nova spits out your kid should be here. The next one over is the ACSI range. The first one is the percentile, second is stain line. You're never going to need to explain that to a parent. The same is true for the next 3 columns. What you probably want to be able to explain to a parent is that national percentile range, which is the last column before the graph starts. And that is where those students scored. So you can see this is their dot. Their range was between an 82 and an 84. Again, because it's national percentile, you read that as saying you did better than 87% of students that took this test. You did better than 75% of students that took this test. That gray bar right down the middle, that whole gray section, is again where Terra Nova would expect students to fall. That is that very panicky 50% number. So you're going to have to talk them off the ledge on that, on what that actually means. But that's the expected spot to fall. Got that? Okay. That's it. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to pull up my computer screen so you can see what I'm looking at, so you can read kind of the overarching class reports that we look at. So how are students doing overall in a grade level? Yes.
Do we have the actual test results back, like the real thing?
Yeah, these are your real results for your grade level.
I meant, did the parents get them? Are they to be handed out?
Sure.
What?
Holly, have the parents seen the Terra Nova scores from last week?
They are actually in their packets that they pick up at Block Party on Saturday.
All right. I didn't
It's very possible you're going to get bombarded on Saturday.
That's what I want to anticipate.
Be prepared.
Yeah.
Stony, did you get ours?
Okay. So,
Is that this year's?
if you will take out your grade level sheet that you're responsible for teaching, we're going to kind of look at the things that I look at in terms of overall curriculum. Where are we falling short? Where are we increasing? What I typically do is I begin looking at this report first. And then I make some comparisons to, like for example, this is a 5th grade example. I also look at what they did in 4th grade and determine, was there an area where we saw improvement for all 4th graders moving into 5th grade? Or were there any declines in terms of overall understanding for a class in areas where maybe they were higher? Keep in mind, when we're looking at that, we also have turnover in students. So when you're looking at full class reports, you have to remember that is not necessarily the same exact group of students that you had last year. We get a huge influx of students, particularly in their freshman year, and we get a huge influx in junior high, and we oftentimes in the early elementary too get new groups of students, kids leave, and new kids come in every year. So again, we have to remember that as we're looking at this. So on your sheet, I'm going to try to hover over areas. You will notice that there's what we call an average OPI score in that first block of, first column of information. It says average OPI, there's a local, that's our score. That's what our students did. The middle one is the national. In other words, what did they predict nationally how students did? And then what was the difference in those scores? If it's a positive difference, that means that as a class, our students performed better than the national average by that many points. And when I say points, it's not like a percentile. What the OPI is if there were 100 questions, this is a prediction, if there were 100 questions related to that concept, our students on this particular 5th grade report would have scored 71 correct. That's the prediction. So that's like a C. But you'll notice that the national average was 65. Okay? The moderate mastery range for that concept is 39 to 72. So you can see that our students actually performed in 5th grade on basic understanding, if you were looking at that one. You can see that they were really close as a class to being in high mastery as a group. So that's really good. We look at that and we say, wow, that's great. So if you look down at these differences, I'm going to point something out 5th grade, and then we're going to drill down into it a little bit because I did drill into it. You'll notice that if you're seeing high minuses, that means, or if you see minuses in that difference column, that means that our students are performing below the national average in that particular category. And as I was looking at this report and I came across 5th grade, I had a real concern, okay? You'll notice the difference, or our students locally would have had a 23 or a 14 in sentence, phrases, clauses, and writing conventions. And I'm like, what the heck happened there, okay? These are the kinds of things that we look at from a curriculum perspective. I have to ask myself, what is this because, this is a new concept on this test, this could have been a new concept on this test this year, which our curriculum has not caught up to, which very well could be the case. It may be that something traumatic happened and we didn't get to all of that in our curriculum last year. But here's what I want to show you that Terra Nova can do. When we go to the Terra Nova reports, you can see that we can drill down even deeper into the reports to figure out what's going on. Okay? Look at what happened when I drilled down the other day. One student was calculated into this figure. Okay? So it wasn't the whole class. It was a single student score.
We feel better. We feel better.
Well, and I knew that was going to be, but I was like, I want you to see that we can't always make presumptions about scores. And so it is absolutely critical.
They didn't take it.
They're not supposed to take that particular
Right,
section.
exactly. And a student did, and so they scored it, and then
We can tell you
And
who it was.
that student did not do well. That student did not do well.
And by the way, the 5th grade teachers, thank you for being good sports. I knew we'd get to that good part.
Yeah, good one.
So my point is have to tell you that this is what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to take a look at not only individual student test scores and identify who our struggling students are so that we can provide them with the supports in the classrooms and outside the classroom and in focus that they need to be brought up to grade level or beyond. It's also, though, important for us to look at the overall perspective of our students in grades, because I can tell you that when we look at the students who were in 6th grade last year, they are and have been for 3 years they are always the lowest performing group of students in our entire school. And it hasn't been because of the teachers, it's the group of students. It's a big class. There's over 50 kids going to be 7th grade. They've always been a big class. And we have a large number of students that are higher need in there. And so those scores are going to pull the class average down. But what does that mean to us as teachers? It means that when we have those students in our class, we have to realize that's who they are. So we may have to go at a slower pace. We may have to look at how do they better learn. We may have to provide more supports to them. So for those of you that have 7th graders next year, that needs to be a concern. On the flip side, we have a group of students in 2nd that were 2nd graders last year that were off the charts as a group. Okay, so 3rd grade teachers, lucky you. Okay, but that doesn't mean we stop. We still go back and look at, and it's really interesting as you work in your department, you'll be able to go, wow, from 3rd to 4th grade, we saw this really huge increase in, say, math. We did a really good job there in math, but I noticed that their scores fell off in, say, I don't know, history or science or something else. So then we have to ask ourselves, what happened there? Is it a curriculum piece? Is it we didn't spend as much time on it? Or in high school, we might see that, wow, our kids are really doing well in language, and all of a sudden, in 10th grade, we all of a sudden see a plateau. What's happening there? Is it something we need to look at the books we're using, the curriculum that we're teaching? Because remember, we're trying to align ourselves with standards. And those standards in your lesson plan become important because as we drill down into this data, we can start looking at the objectives of each of those category scores to determine where are we in our curriculum falling short in terms of how we're meeting the standards with which the standardized tests are created around. So my point is I want you to know that we have the capacity to do this. My intent this year is really to work with our department heads to help them learn to sort the data and the data reports that we create using your lesson plans, drill down into some of these reports to figure out what's going on, and then be able to work at department and ascending team levels to really determine the kinds of things that we need to do to make our curriculum even stronger. Now, some of you who are preschool teachers and some of you who aren't teachers that teach in these content areas, that doesn't mean that you're not important to this process. Because here's the reality. If our kids are struggling in language, that's an everybody problem. Because you're giving written work, you're giving written assessments, and students have to be able to write everywhere, not just in English class. If we're struggling in science and there's a way to apply science concepts on a report they're writing in English, or in physical education where they're learning about health, where they're learning about the body, let's make those content integrations work so that we can strengthen all of our programs. So, any questions about how to read that report? Yes?
Just to make sure, it says 6th grade, which means this year's 7th grade.
Yes. Yes. So I gave you the report from last year. So really, if it's 6th grade, these are students going into 7th grade, but they're the students that you taught last year in those grade levels.
We were just discussing, one of the things that I think needs to be taken into consideration is how many new incoming students came into a grade level.
Exactly.
Which from 5th to 6th,
Right.
there's a big increase of new
Absolutely.
students who haven't had the background.
Right. And those are all things that as we drill down in, we come to that conclusion, you know. Nothing's perfect, but we have to at least be looking. We have to at least be kind of seeing, and we can see trend lines too. If things are happening every year, then we know, oh, well, that might be something we need to look at. Or if it's kind of one of these things that fluctuates, it could be a group of students. So there's lots of ways to evaluate the data, which is why I gave you that illustration, because I wanted you to realize that you can't just take one piece of data at face value and start making assumptions. You have to drill into it in order to figure out what the problem really is.
So you could figure out that student's name and know
Yeah.
exactly which one and say, oh, well, he's a transfer student in December and
Exactly.
hadn't had, okay, you could tell
And if
by
we
name.
see a low performing group, we need to go into that classroom and go, okay, let's see how every kid in 6th grade did on the Terra Nova, and let's look and see at which ones really are below mastery or right at barely edge of mastery. And then let's identify who they are, and if they're not in our focus program, let's get them in our focus program. But let's not just leave them hanging out here. Because unfortunately for you as teachers, you have them for a year. And then they move on. And then and I was a teacher too, it's like, oh, they're gone, they're out of my class, don't have to think about that. I'm on to the next group of students. But those students still travel through our system, and we do still have to have concern for them. But that will be part of my job too, now that I'm here on staff and can spend more time with you and working on these things, to drill down and do the things that we need to do to make our curriculum better. And to help you, because when you don't know, so let's say from elementary into middle school, we know that we have this struggling group of 5th graders last year, or I mean 5th graders 2 years ago, and then 6th grade and middle school. If the middle school teachers aren't aware of that, then they go in with the same approach that was used last time, and it may or may not have worked, and then those students lose again another half a year, another semester, another quarter, before we realize we've got to do something different. If we have that information going into each new year, then we can be more intentional on how we're planning our lessons and how we are addressing students and how we're working with them and the kinds of supports that we're able to provide. Okay, yes, absolutely.
It says number of students and number of students in accommodations.
Yes.
But I know that some of these kids got mixed at the time, or
Sure.
possibly a couple that I can't remember.
And you're only seeing one report, and Holly has it. This report is printed also for all students who had accommodations made. So they're on a separate report. So they're not necessarily on that one.
I don't think Holly included accommodations just because, so like, we didn't really, unless the parent really insisted, we didn't at the high school level anyway. They just took it, right?
Yeah, there were only if their PSS insisted that they have to test read to them, or outside, there were a very small number of kids that fell into that situation, and they were then excluded from the results. But for the most part, everybody took it in class and are involved, are accounted for in that group.
So any other questions before we move on? Okay, the last piece that I really want to share with you is I do create a data report. And keep in mind, this is the initial report that gets sent out to the administrative team to just identify what's being seen on those OPI documents. So there's been no drilling down at this point. We've just started that process. When I saw the 5th grade piece though, after I'd written the report, I'm like, I need to go in and drill and see what's going on with that. So I started the process and found it right away. Sometimes that will happen. Sometimes it takes a lot more time. So what I want you to know is what goes in that report. So what I typically report on is, in 1st grade, I talk about, as a class, how they performed in relationship to the national average on all the categories they were tested. Not on each objective, but on each category. So you can see in 1st grade, they performed at or below in 4 areas, and I named them. And then there was the smallest difference in average, which was, and here's the deal. If the smallest difference was -1, it means they were 1 point below the national average, which isn't very much in the big scheme of things. So you have to look at that as well. When you say below, well, how much below are we talking? -1 means they are right at moderate mastery. You can also see that the greatest difference for 1st graders was in basic understanding, and there was a 16-point difference in a positive direction, which means in 1st grade, in relationship to basic understanding, they were performing 16 points higher than students nationally on that same component of the test. So that's what I do for each grade level. For a number of our grades, you can see 2nd grade performed above national average in all areas. Same thing for 3rd grade. Same thing for 4th grade. 5th grade, a little bit, they performed below in 3 areas. But again, that difference was 2 of those were those 2 that only 1 kid took. So in reality, we only scored lower in 1, and it was only a minus 2-point difference. So you can kind of see this is where the report starts. And then that helps us to define, all right, where do we need to start looking? Then the other piece that I do, which you don't see unless you look at this year's report and then last year's scores, is I try to create a difference. So I say, like in 2nd grade, these were the where there were differences. So in word text, introduction to print operations, these represent a decrease in OPIB from last year to this year. So it's simply just saying that for this group, last year, their OPI score was higher than it is this year. And again, we have to go back and look at those students. If it's a completely different group of students, that doesn't really matter. But if it's the exact same group of students, that does matter, because it's telling us that they're trending toward losing ground in a particular concept and then gaining ground. So we want to make sure we're taking note of that. And again, some of these grades are going to show higher differences or drops because of that influx of students. So you can even see it here. 9th grade, look at how many categories they were lower. We get a whole bunch of new freshmen, but that number changes a little bit as juniors and of course sophomores and juniors because we have fewer kids that transfer in and out. And then I provide just a summary of things that we need to drill down into as we continue to look at the Terra Nova data reports to determine what's going on with our students and how we can improve our curriculum. So that's where it starts. Each of the department chairs will get a copy of that report. I know that I did an in-service training where I showed you the Excel document that has all of your lesson plans and all the standards and showed you how to sort through that. Can I just, with all honesty, will you raise your hand if you actually ever opened that document and tried to sort something? Okay, a few. All right, I figured that would probably be the case. It's overwhelming for me. I can't imagine how overwhelming it is for you. But my hope is that I'll work with the department heads to do some of that this year, so that when you're sitting in your department meetings, you can make some research and data-driven decisions about where you're going to go from here. Yes?
And remember, or if you haven't looked yet, we are doing ascending team meetings almost every other week, which means as the English department sits down together, we're going to sit down preschool through high school, and we can drill down into specific areas that need to be addressed. The same with science and history and each of the subjects. Now that doesn't mean preschool and elementary is going to be at every one of those meetings, but I will steer them toward where they need to be so we can hit these areas and try and strengthen this to improve instruction.
The other thing too is, how many of us have implemented new curriculum over the years? Oh, we're going to try something new. Okay, right? It also will help us determine a little bit, is what we chose to do working? Or is it not? Is what we did last time better? So it will really, again, help us to make some of those changes and identify where we're strong. Where we're strong and where we're weak, and whether it works or it doesn't. So I know data is like, gives you a headache. It gives me a headache too.
Yeah, this report will be posted. What we have is a professional development file in the all-staff drive. This report will be PDF'd and available for everyone to see. Plus, what she's talked about, we're videotaping, that will also be in that drive, so you'll be able to review it. If you didn't catch everything, you can hear it again, you can review it, you can figure out how, again, we can work toward improving instruction.
And if you're interested in knowing more about the students that are in your classes, Holly has access to the Terra Nova dashboard. I have access to the Terra Nova dashboard, and we can help you get the reports and the information that you may want to see on your students. Okay?